They told her she was throwing away her last $600 on a death trap. The single mother who bought the condemned Firehouse, while neighbors lined up to laugh at her desperation. But when she finally pried open the rusted floor vault that hadn't been touched since 1967, she discovered something that would silence every cruel word forever. $245 million in bearer bonds that belonged to her. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The auction notice had been stapled to the Firehouse door for 3 weeks. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Flapping in the December wind like a surrender flag, Jessica Torres stood across the street, her 6-year-old son Miguel's hand tucked into hers, both of them staring at what the city had officially declared a hazard to public safety. The old engine company 7 Firehouse rose 3 stories into the gray Philadelphia sky, its brick facade scarred by a fire that had consumed it 10 years ago. The massive red doors hung crooked on their hinges. Windows on the upper floors were boarded over, or simply gone. The bell tower that had once called firefighters to action now leaned at an angle that made passersby cross to the other side of the street. "Mama, it looks like it's going to fall down," Miguel whispered, pressing closer to her threadbare winter coat. Jessica squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the $600 in her purse. Every dollar she had in the world, scraped together from tips at the diner, selling her grandmother's jewelry, and one desperate pawnshop transaction she tried not to think about. Sometimes the best things are hiding where no one else wants to look, mijo. The auctioneer, a thin woman named Carol who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, stood on the Firehouse steps with a clipboard and a megaphone. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered. Not bidders, Jessica realized with a sinking feeling. Spectators, come to watch the city finally get rid of its embarrassment. She recognized most of them. Derek from the bodega, who'd refused to extend her credit last month. Paulina, who managed the apartment building where Jessica had just been evicted for being 2 weeks late with rent. Even Father Martinez from Street Anthony's, though at least he had the decency to look sympathetic. "Let's get this over with," Carol's voice crackled through the megaphone. Former engine company 7 Firehouse, built 1892, condemned by the city in 2014, following structural damage from fire and subsequent vandalism. Property sold strictly as is. No warranties, no inspections. Buyer assumes all liability for demolition and hazardous material removal. She paused, looked at the building like it personally offended her, and sighed. Minimum bid to cover back taxes and fees. $600. The crowd went completely silent. Then someone in the back actually laughed. A ripple of amusement spread through the gathered neighbors like a wave of shared cruelty. $600. For that, Derek called out. "You'd have to pay me to take it. Cost more than that just to tear it down properly," someone else added. "Foundations probably shot. Place should have been demolished years ago." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she either took the biggest risk of her life or walked away and accepted that her and Miguel would be living in her 15-year-old Honda Civic by next week. $600, Carol repeated, louder this time. "Do I hear $600? Jessica raised her hand. The laughter stopped, then started again, harder this time. "Mina." "Oh no. No, no, no." Paulina stepped forward, shaking her head. "Jessica, honey, you can't be serious. That building is about to collapse. Where are you even going to get $600? "I have it," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Derek was practically howling now. "This is that single mom from Rico's diner, right? The one who can't even pay rent on time? And she's gonna buy a condemned building. Someone should call child services." A woman Jessica didn't recognize muttered, not quite quietly enough. "That poor kid." Miguel's hand tightened in hers. Jessica felt him trying to make himself smaller. invisible. The way she'd taught him to be when adults were angry or dismissive. The realization made her jaw clench. "Ma'am," Carol said, her megaphone lowering. There was genuine concern in her voice now. "Are you absolutely certain? This property requires immediate structural reinforcement, complete electrical rewiring, asbestos abatement. And that's before addressing the fire damage. We're talking hundreds of thousands in repairs. $600, Jessica said clearly, meeting Carol's eyes. That's your asking price. I'm bidding it." Carol studied her for a long moment. Then, because she had a job to do and rules to follow, she raised her megaphone. "We have a bid of $600. Going once." "Jessica, think about Miguel," Father Martinez called out. His voice was kind, which somehow made it worse. "Where will you two stay? You can't live in that building." "Going twice." "This is insane," Paulina said. "Someone stop her. This is literally throwing away money she doesn't have." "Sold," Carol said, bringing down her clipboard like a gavel. "To Miss Torres for $600. The crowd erupted in a mixture of disbelief and savage entertainment. Jessica heard every word as she walked forward to sign the papers, Miguel still clinging to her hand. "Single mom buying a condemned firehouse. I've seen everything now. That building's going to kill someone. Probably her. Bet she can't even afford the demolition permit when it falls down on top of her. Poor kids, going to grow up with a mother who makes decisions like that." Jessica kept her chin high and signed her name with a hand that only shook a little. Carol handed her a massive iron keyring, leaning in close. "Miss Torres, I hope you have a plan. Because that building, it's not safe. Please don't try to go inside without a structural engineer." "I can't afford a structural engineer," Jessica replied simply. "Then you definitely can't afford this building." But Carol's voice had softened. "There's still time to back out. I can void the sale if—" "No." Jessica closed her fingers around the keys. They were heavy, old, solid, real. "This is mine now." As the crowd dispersed, still murmuring and shaking their heads, Paulina approached one last time. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that made Jessica's skin crawl. "Well, Jessica, I guess you won't be needing that apartment anymore. Got yourself a mansion now." Her laugh was sharp. "I want the keys back by Friday. And don't think this little circus show changes anything about the back rent you owe me. $350, remember?" Jessica met her gaze steadily. "I'll have your keys Thursday." Paulina walked away, still chuckling to herself. The others followed, casting final glances of pity or amusement. Soon it was just Jessica and Miguel standing before their new home. "Mama," Miguel said quietly, his dark eyes enormous in his thin face. Why were they all laughing? Jessica knelt down, eye level with her son. The sidewalk was cold and damp through her jeans, but she ignored it. Because sometimes, mijo, when people are scared to take chances themselves, they laugh at people who are brave enough to try. Does it make them right? Miguel thought about this with the seriousness only 6-year-olds could manage. No. But are you scared? Jessica looked up at the firehouse. Water damage streaked the brick like tears. The roof sagged in the middle. The stone steps were crumbling. But something about it called to her. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd driven past this building every day for 3 years, always wondering about its stories, its history, its secrets. Terrified, she admitted. But that's how I know it matters. They climbed the steps together, Jessica fitting the largest key into the padlock that secured the crooked red doors. It turned with surprising ease, and the lock fell open. The doors themselves took both of them pulling to move, hinges shrieking in protest. Inside, Jessica's breath caught. Despite the fire damage, despite the years of neglect, she could see what it had been. The massive apparatus bay stretched before them, high ceilings with exposed beams. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The pole firefighters had once slid down, still standing in the corner like a sentinel. The afternoon light filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in shafts of gold. "Whoa," Miguel breathed, his fear momentarily forgotten. "This is so cool." They explored cautiously, Jessica testing each floorboard before letting Miguel follow. The first floor was the most damaged. Charred walls, collapsed ceiling sections, debris everywhere. But as they climbed the iron staircase to the second floor, things improved. The living quarters where firefighters had once slept were mostly intact. Bunk beds still lined the walls, stripped of mattresses but structurally sound. A small kitchen area held cabinets that opened to reveal ancient canned goods and coffee cups. A bathroom with fixtures from another era, but the toilet actually flushed when Jessica tentatively tried it. "We could live up here," Miguel said, peering into what must have been the captain's quarters. "It's like a castle." Jessica's throat tightened. Her 6-year-old son, trying to find the positive in their disaster. She hugged him close. "We'll see, baby. First, I need to figure out if it's safe." The third floor was locked. Unlike the main entrance, this door was sealed with multiple deadbolts and a padlock that looked newer than the building itself. Jessica tried every key on the ring, but none fit. "That's weird," she muttered, examining the door more closely. Unlike the rest of the firehouse, which showed obvious signs of the 2014 fire and subsequent vandalism, this door and its frame were pristine, protected, hidden. "Maybe that's where they kept the treasure," Miguel suggested hopefully. Jessica smiled at her son's optimism. "Maybe, Mijo, maybe." That night, they slept in the back of the Honda Civic, parked in the firehouse driveway. Jessica had $17 left after the auction, and the motel she'd been staying in wanted $45 for another night. Math had never been her strong suit, but she could calculate impossible just fine. Miguel curled up in the back seat with his blanket and stuffed bear, while Jessica reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go. December in Philadelphia was brutal, and the car's heater only worked when the engine was running. She couldn't afford to waste gas. She lay there in the dark, listening to Miguel's breathing even out into sleep, and thought about the locked third floor, about the crowd's laughter, about $17 and a condemned building and a future that looked like nothing but hard choices. But something deep in her gut, that same instinct that had gotten her through 6 years of single motherhood, dead-end jobs, and every other impossible situation, told her she'd made the right choice. There was something about this firehouse, something that called to her like a promise waiting to be kept. Tomorrow she'd start cleaning. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to make the building livable. Tomorrow she'd prove them all wrong. What she didn't know was that tomorrow would also be the day she'd discover why Engine Company 7 had really been abandoned, why that third floor had been sealed, and why her $600 gamble would turn out to be worth more than anyone could have imagined. Morning came with frost on the Honda's windows and Miguel coughing from the cold. Jessica's back screamed in protest as she sat up, every muscle cramped from sleeping in the car. She checked her phone. 6:47 a.m. Miguel's school didn't start until 8:30. "Come on, baby," she said, gently shaking him awake. "Let's get you ready for school." They used the firehouse bathroom, the water running rust-colored for a minute before clearing. No hot water, but at least the plumbing worked. Jessica helped Miguel brush his teeth and wash his face with hands that had gone numb in the night. "Mama, I'm hungry," Miguel said, his breath visible in the cold air. Jessica's stomach clenched. She had packed cereal bars yesterday, but they were gone now. School breakfast wouldn't start for another hour. "I know, mijo. You'll eat at school, okay? Mrs. Patterson always gives you extra." Miguel nodded, not complaining. And that somehow made it worse. 6 years old, and already learning to swallow his needs, because Mama couldn't meet them. She dropped him at school, ignoring the looks from other parents in their warm cars, their clean clothes, their lives that worked. Then she drove to Rico's diner, where she'd worked the breakfast shift for 2 years. Rico was behind the counter when she walked in, his face already set in, the expression she'd been dreading. "Jessica, we need to talk." They talked in the back room, among boxes of napkins and industrial-sized ketchup containers. Rico was a good man, which made this harder. "I heard about the auction," he said gently. "The whole neighborhood's talking about it. I made a choice, Rico. You made a choice that shows your head's not in the game." He sighed. "Jessica, I like you. You're a good worker. But I can't have someone on my team who's distracted, who might not show up because they're dealing with a condemned building falling on them." The firing was almost a relief. At least it was honest. No false kindness, no performative concern. Just the reality of being poor. One bad decision, and the whole house of cards collapsed. She walked out with 2 days' pay, $156, and no job. The math was simple now. $173 total. Minus gas to pick up Miguel. Minus food. Minus everything. Jessica sat in the Honda in Rico's parking lot and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face, started the car, and drove back to the firehouse. If she was going to fail, she'd fail trying. She spent the day cleaning the second floor with supplies she couldn't afford. Bleach, trash bags, rubber gloves, a push broom from the dollar store. Every purchase calculated, every dollar a small death. By afternoon, she'd cleared one room enough to be habitable. Barely. That's when she heard it. A sound from above. From the locked 3rd floor. Not wind. Not settling. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Pacing. Jessica froze, broom in hand. The building was supposed to be empty. She'd checked the first 2 floors thoroughly. Unless someone had been squatting up there, behind that sealed door. She climbed the iron stairs slowly, every instinct screaming at her to grab Miguel from school and run. But this was her building now. Her responsibility, her risk. The 3rd floor landing was exactly as she'd left it. Door sealed, padlock secure. But the footsteps continued, clear as day, just beyond the barrier. "Hello?" Jessica called out. "This is private property. I'm the owner. If someone's in there, you need to come out." The footsteps stopped. Then, a voice. Old. Male. Weary. "You shouldn't be here, girl. Nothing up here but ghosts and bad choices." Jessica's hand found her phone, thumb hovering over 911. "I'm calling the police. Police can't help with this. Neither can you. Leave while you still can. This is my building. Come out, or I'm calling them anyway." A long pause. Then, "You bought this place? For how much?" "That's none of your business." A dry, bitter laugh. $600, I'll bet. That's what they wanted for the taxes. So they finally found someone desperate enough. More footsteps. Coming closer to the door. "What's your name, girl?" "Jessica. Jessica Torres. And I'm not a girl. I'm 32 years old, and I'm the legal owner of this property. Jessica Torres." The voice was softer now. "You got kids?" Her hand tightened on the phone. "Why?" "Because if you do, you need to get them far away from here. This building, it's not what it seems. There are things sealed up here, for good reason." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to save you." The weariness in his voice made it ring true. The 3rd floor. The seals on that door. The reason this place was condemned. It wasn't just a fire. It was what they found after the fire. Jessica's mind raced. What did they find? The captain's secret. Captain Henry Morrison. Last man to run this firehouse before it closed. He thought he was protecting something. Turns out he was hiding it. A thud. Like someone sitting down heavily against the door. "I'm James. James Morrison. Henry was my father. And I've been watching this building for 27 years, making sure no one gets inside this room." "You've been living here?" In a condemned building? Living's a strong word. Existing. Waiting. Making sure the door stayed locked. Jessica lowered the toe. Phone slightly. What's behind the door? Truth. The kind that ruins lives. James's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My father was fire captain here, from 1957 to 1967. Good man. Decorated. Respected. But in '67, something happened. City was broke. Laying off firefighters. Cutting pensions. Dad was furious. Said the city fathers were corrupt, spending money on their pet projects while first responders starved. So he did something about it? He did something all right. Embezzled city emergency funds, disaster relief money, pension contributions, equipment budgets, converted it all to bearer bonds. $245 million over the course of 6 years. Jessica's legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the wall. $245 million? He was going to give it back. That's what he told me before he died. Said it was insurance, proof of the city's corruption. He documented everything, had evidence of where the money was supposed to go, how officials were skimming. He was building a case. James's voice cracked. But he had a heart attack in 1968. Died without telling anyone where he'd hidden the bonds. Just told me, on his deathbed, it's all in the firehouse. 3rd floor. Our insurance policy. I thought he was delirious. But you found them. Took me 20 years. By then, I'd wasted my life looking. Destroyed my marriage. Lost my job. Alienated everyone who cared about me. I finally found them in 1988, hidden in a false bottom safe built into the floor. And you know what I realized? What? I couldn't use them. Couldn't sell them. Couldn't cash them. The moment I tried, I'd be caught. They were blood money, stolen from people who needed it, teachers whose pensions dried up, fire stations that closed for lack of funding, disaster victims who got pennies instead of real help. His laugh was hollow. My father's insurance policy was a life sentence. So, you've just been sitting on them for 36 years? Protecting them. Making sure no one else found them. Got tempted. Got destroyed by them. The way they destroyed my father and me. I scared off investors, paid teenagers to vandalize the building, even set that fire in 2014 to get the city to condemn it. Figured if no one could buy it, no one could find the bonds. Jessica processed this, her mind spinning. But I bought it. You bought it because I got old and sick and couldn't keep scaring people away anymore. Because I thought $600 for a condemned building would keep anyone from trying. His voice was tired beyond measure. I was wrong. James, Jessica said carefully, you need medical help. And those bonds, they need to be turned in. They can't be turned in. I'm an accessory to theft. The moment I admit I've known about them for 36 years, I go to prison. And I'm dying anyway, so what's the point? The point is doing the right thing. Another bitter laugh. Right thing. Girl. The right thing is complicated when you're poor and desperate. You bought a condemned building with your last $600. You think I don't understand desperation? You think I don't know what it's like to see that kind of money and know it could change everything? He was right. And Jessica hated that he was right. She stood there on the landing, phone in hand, $173 to her name, no job, a 6-year-old son, and somewhere beyond that door was enough money to solve every problem she'd ever had. What would you do? James asked. If you found those bonds, if you could take them and disappear, give your kid everything, what would you do? Jessica closed her eyes. She thought of Miguel's cough this morning, his thin winter coat, his quiet acceptance of never having enough. She thought of the field trips she couldn't afford, the birthdays celebrated with dollar store cupcakes, the way he'd learned to want less, because less was all they had. I'd call the FBI, she said finally. Silence. Then, you're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. Jessica sat down on the top step. But James, think about it. That money was stolen from real people. Teachers, firefighters, families who needed disaster relief. 36 years of compound interest. That's hundreds of millions more that should have been helping communities. How many schools didn't get built? How many fire stations closed? How many families suffered because that money was hidden? And if you turn it in, you think they'll reward you? Girl, they'll destroy you. Rich people don't like being embarrassed by poor people telling the truth. Maybe. But at least Miguel would know his mother tried to do right. Another long pause. Then the sound of locks turning, deadbolts sliding. The door opened. James Morrison was a wreck of a man. Gaunt, grey, swimming in clothes that had once fit. He leaned on a cane, and his eyes were yellowed with sickness. But when he looked at Jessica, there was something like respect there. "You're really going to do it," he said. "We're going to do it. Together." Jessica stood. "You said you have documentation? Evidence of where the money was supposed to go?" James nodded slowly. "My father kept meticulous records. Thought he was building a case against corruption. Really, he was just documenting his own crimes. Then we'll need those too. And a lawyer. And probably a miracle." She smiled, exhausted but determined. "But first, can I see them? The bonds?" James studied her for a long moment. Then, he stepped aside. The third floor had been a storage area once, but now it was part shrine, part prison cell. Photos of firefighters lined the walls. Captain Henry Morrison featured prominently, a proud man in dress uniform. There were newspaper clippings about the Firehouse, about pension cuts, about the city's financial troubles in the 60 seconds. And in the center of the room, set into the floor, was a safe, not a small one. Industrial size, the kind banks used. The door stood open. Inside, arranged in perfect stacks, were hundreds of bearer bonds, each one promising payment to whoever held it. Each one representing money stolen from people who had needed it desperately. Jessica knelt beside the safe, hands trembling. She pulled out one bundle, $100,000 per bond. 10 in a stack. She couldn't even begin to count them all. "It's all there," James said quietly. "I counted it 1,000 times. $245 million in 1967 dollars. With interest. If they were legitimate government bonds, you're probably looking at over $1 billion now. $1 billion. The number was so large it meant nothing. Jessica thought of the $173 in her purse and almost laughed. "My father was a good man who made a terrible choice," James continued. "And I've been a broken man paying for his sins ever since. Maybe you can break that cycle. Maybe you can make something right out of all this wrong." Jessica looked up at him. "You're really willing to come forward? Face the consequences?" "I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months? Maybe less. I've got nothing to lose except the chance to die with some dignity." He smiled sadly. "Besides, I'm tired. 36 years is a long time to carry a secret." That's when they heard it. Footsteps on the stairs below. Heavy boots. Multiple people. Jessica and James froze. Then a voice called up. "City building inspector. We've received reports of illegal occupation of a condemned property." James's face went white. "They'll find it. They'll find everything. Not if I handle this." Jessica moved to the door. "Stay here. Don't let anyone past this landing." She met the inspectors on the second floor. 3 of them, clipboards and hard hats, ready to shut down any chance she had of making this work. The lead inspector was a broad man named Patterson, who looked like he enjoyed wielding authority. "Miss Torres, you can't be in here. This building is condemned. I'm the owner. I bought it yesterday at auction. That doesn't matter. Condemned means no occupation until repairs are completed and inspections passed." He was already making notes. "I'm going to have to cite you, and if you don't vacate immediately, we'll involve the police. I'm not living here. I was just assessing the property." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Reports say someone's been living here for years. Squatter. We need to do a full inspection. The first 2 floors are clear. I checked myself. We'll need to verify that. All 3 floors. He moved toward the stairs. Jessica stepped in front of him. The 3rd floor is structurally unsound. The floor could collapse. It's not safe. That's exactly why we need to inspect it. Patterson tried to move past her. I'm the legal owner, and I'm refusing you access for safety reasons. If you want to inspect, you'll need to come back with proper structural engineers and safety equipment. Patterson's face reddened. Ma'am, I can get a court order. Then get one. Until then, this is private property, and you're trespassing. Jessica's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. The 3 inspectors conferred. Finally, Patterson pulled out his phone. Fine. We'll be back tomorrow with a court order and the police. And when we find out you've been harboring a squatter in a condemned building, you'll be facing criminal charges. He jabbed a finger at her. Enjoy your last night here. They left, and Jessica sagged against the wall. Tomorrow. They had until tomorrow. She climbed back to the 3rd floor, where James still stood, ashen-faced. They're coming back. Tomorrow. Then it's over. No. Jessica pulled out her phone. We're ending this tonight. On our terms. She called information. Got transferred 3 times. Finally reached the Philadelphia FBI field office. My name is Jessica Torres. I'm calling to report the discovery of $245 million in bearer bonds stolen from city emergency funds in the 1,960 seconds. There was a pause. Then, ma'am, can you repeat that? She told them everything. Every detail. James's father, the embezzlement, the 36 of years of hiding, the evidence, all of it. They told her not to touch anything, not to leave, that agents would be there within the hour. Jessica hung up and looked at James. It's done. He sank into a chair, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved. What happens now? I don't know. But at least it'll be the truth. They waited together in the cold firehouse, 2 strangers bound by impossible circumstances. James told her stories about his father, about the firehouse in its glory days, about the moment he realized the insurance policy was actually a curse. He thought he was protecting us, James said quietly. Instead, he destroyed us. My mother died thinking my father was a hero. I've lived, knowing he was a thief. And I became a thief too, the moment I found those bonds and didn't turn them in. You're turning them in now. 36 years too late. Better late than never. The FBI arrived with sirens and flashing lights. Agents in suits, forensic accountants, specialists of every kind. They swarmed the firehouse like it was a crime scene, which Jessica supposed it was. Agent Sarah Matthews interviewed her first. Kind eyes but no nonsense questions. Jessica told the story again, leaving nothing out. Matthews took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just listening. And you didn't take any of the bonds? Didn't even touch them? I took one out, looked at it, put it back. Why? Jessica thought about Miguel, about the field trips, and the warm coat, and the birthday parties he deserved. Because it wasn't mine, and teaching my son that would matter more than any amount of money. Matthews studied her for a long moment. Most people wouldn't have made that choice. Most people aren't desperate enough to buy a condemned firehouse for $600. Jessica smiled, tiredly. I've been poor my whole life. I know what it's like to be stolen from. I wouldn't do that to anyone else. They interviewed James next. He confessed everything, his voice steady for the first time in 36 years. Yes, he'd known about the bonds. Yes, he'd hidden them. Yes, he'd vandalized the building to keep others away. He showed them his father's documentation, meticulous records of every dollar stolen, every fake invoice, every trail of corruption. The forensic team catalogued the bonds, one by one, stack by stack. The final count came to $245.7 million in face value, with decades of accrued interest that should have been compounding in legitimate government accounts. The real value was over $1.2 billion. The news trucks arrived by midnight. Single mother discovers stolen fortune in condemned firehouse. Jessica refused interviews, but the cameras caught her anyway, emerging from the building exhausted and shell-shocked. Miguel called from the neighbors who were watching him. "Mama, Mrs. Chen says you're on TV. What's happening?" "Everything's okay, Mijo. I'll explain when I pick you up. I love you." "I love you too, Mama." The FBI sealed the firehouse as a crime scene. Jessica and James were both told not to leave the city. Charges against James would be determined after further investigation. Jessica, they said, might be eligible for whistleblower compensation, but that would take months, maybe years to determine. She picked up Miguel at 2 a.m. The boy sleepy and confused. They drove to a motel that took cash and didn't ask questions. In the dark room, with Miguel finally asleep beside her, Jessica let herself think about what she'd done. $1.2 billion. She'd found $1.2 billion and called the FBI, given it all away, chosen integrity over every dream she'd ever had for Miguel. And somehow, impossibly, she felt lighter. The next morning brought a media storm. Reporters camped outside the motel. The story was everywhere. Single mother turns in billion-dollar find. Philadelphia firehouse hides. 50-year secret. Woman chooses honor over fortune. Derek from the bodega called. Suddenly, friendly. Paulina from the apartment building wanted to apologize. Even Father Martinez stopped by with casseroles and carefully worded praise. Jessica ignored them all. What she couldn't ignore was the letter that arrived by courier on the third day, from a law firm she'd never heard of. Inside was a business card and a handwritten note. "Miss Torres, my name is Robert Chen. I represent the families affected by the 1967 emergency fund embezzlement. My grandfather was a firefighter whose pension was cut when that money disappeared. He died broke, thinking he'd failed his family. You've given us answers and possibly restitution. I'd like to discuss representing you in the whistleblower proceedings. Pro bono, you deserve justice too." Jessica called the number with shaking hands. 3 weeks later, she sat in Robert Chen's pristine office, Miguel coloring quietly in the corner, while Robert explained what was happening. "The federal government has confirmed that the bonds are legitimate and represent stolen funds. They're being liquidated, and the money will be returned to the affected communities. Schools that were never built will finally get funding. Fire stations that closed can reopen. Pension funds will be restored with interest." He smiled. "Because of you, thousands of families will finally get what they were owed." "What about James?" Robert's expression grew serious. "James Morrison is cooperating fully. Given his father's crimes, his own concealment, and the vandalism charges, he could face prison time. But his terminal diagnosis and full cooperation are mitigating factors. The prosecutor is considering a plea deal that would let him spend his remaining months in hospice care rather than jail." Jessica nodded. James had made terrible choices, but he was also a man destroyed by his father's secrets. "And me? You," Robert leaned forward, eyes bright, "are eligible for whistleblower compensation under federal law. The amount is discretionary, typically 10–30% of recovered funds. In this case," he slid a paper across the desk, "the recommendation is 15%, which would be approximately $180 million. The number didn't compute." Jessica stared at the paper, at the zeros, at the impossible reality of what Robert was saying. That's not real." "It is. It'll take months to finalize, but the FBI is recommending it. You found stolen federal funds, turned them in despite desperate circumstances, and provided full cooperation. You did everything right, Jessica. This is your reward." Jessica thought of the $600 she'd spent on the firehouse, the $173 she'd had left, the weeks of living in her car, of Miguel coughing in the cold, of every choice that had led to that moment on the third-floor landing. "I didn't do it for money. she said quietly. I know. That's exactly why you're getting it. The money came through in stages. First, immediate assistance, $50,000, to cover living expenses while the full amount was processed. Jessica used it to rent a real apartment, with 2 bedrooms and windows that sealed. She bought Miguel a winter coat that actually fit and shoes that weren't from the thrift store. She paid Paulina the back rent she owed, not because she had to, but because being right didn't mean being cruel. She didn't go back to Rico's diner, but she stopped by once to thank Rico for the 2 years of work. He was uncomfortable, apologetic, said he'd been too hasty in firing her. She told him it was okay, that she understood, that everyone made choices based on fear sometimes. The full whistleblower payment took 6 months to process, $180 million, minus taxes, lawyers' fees, and various costs, left Jessica with approximately $120 million in actual money, more than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. The first thing she did was set up a trust for Miguel. College, graduate school, whatever he wanted. He'd never wonder where his next meal was coming from. The second thing was, find James Morrison. He was in hospice care, a small facility on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Jessica walked in carrying flowers and a folder. James was rail-thin now, the cancer having accelerated in the months since his confession. But when he saw her, his yellowed eyes lit up. Jessica Torres, the woman who did what I couldn't. She sat beside his bed. How are you feeling? Dying. But free. For the first time in 36 years. I'm free. He smiled. Did you come to gloat? I came to say thank you. And to give you this. She opened the folder, showing him documents from the city. The pension fund that was stolen? It's been restored. Your mother's benefits, the ones she never got after your father died, they're being paid retroactively to you as her heir. With interest, it comes to about $340,000. James stared at the papers, tears streaming down his gaunt face. My mother died broke, worked until she was 80, still trying to make ends meet. And this money, it was there all along. I'm sorry, Jessica said, and meant it. Don't be. This is more than I deserve. He wiped his eyes. What are you going to do with your windfall? Jessica had thought about this question for months. I'm starting a foundation for single parents who are one disaster away from homelessness. Emergency funds, housing assistance, job training. I'm calling it the Engine Company 7 Foundation. James laughed. A wet, painful sound. My father's firehouse. His stolen money. All going to help the kind of people he hurt. There's poetry in that. There's justice in it. He reached out a shaking hand and Jessica took it. You're a good person, Jessica Torres. Thank you for making something right out of all this wrong. James Morrison died 3 weeks later. Jessica attended his funeral. She was the only one there besides the hospice chaplain. The next year passed in a blur of planning, organizing, and learning how to be a person with resources instead of a person desperate for them. Jessica hired staff, rented office space, and built a foundation that could actually help people the way she wished someone had helped her. The Engine Company 7 Foundation opened with a simple mission. No one should have to choose between integrity and survival. They provided emergency grants, no questions asked, to single parents facing eviction, medical bills, job loss. They funded job training programs. They helped with childcare costs so parents could work or go to school. In the first year, they helped 847 families. By year 3, that number had grown to over 3,000. Jessica bought the condemned firehouse from the city for $1. They tried to give it to her free, given everything that had happened. But she insisted on paying. $600 had been her investment in hope. $1 felt right for the building that had changed her life. She renovated it carefully, preserving its history while making it safe and beautiful. The first floor became the foundation's headquarters. The second floor housed emergency shelter apartments for families in crisis. The third floor, where the bonds had hidden for so long, became a museum and education center. The centerpiece of the museum was the safe, still set into the floor, now empty except for a single replica bond, and a plaque that read, "What we hide in darkness can only be freed by light. What we steal in fear can only be redeemed by courage." On the 1-year anniversary of finding the bonds, Jessica stood in the renovated firehouse with Miguel, now 7 years old and thriving. The building glowed with light and life. Families receiving assistance filled the common areas. Volunteers bustled about. The sound of hope echoed off the old brick walls. "Mama," Miguel asked, looking up at the photos of Engine Company 7 Inches Its Glory Days, "do you think the firefighters would be happy about what we did with their building?" Jessica thought of Captain Henry Morrison, whose terrible choice had rippled through decades, of James, who'd wasted his life guarding stolen money, of all the families who'd suffered from that original sin. "I think they'd be proud. We took something broken and made it whole again. Is that what heroes do?" She knelt down, looking her son in the eyes. "Heroes aren't perfect, mijo. They're just people who keep trying to do right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That evening, after the anniversary celebration ended and the last families left, Jessica stood alone in the third-floor museum. The city stretched out beyond the windows, lights twinkling like promises in the dark. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert Chen. "Another family helped today, thanks to you. $3,847 total. Your $600 investment keeps paying dividends." Jessica smiled. She thought about that December day when she'd stood across the street, hand clutching Miguel's $600 in her purse, and the whole neighborhood laughing at her desperation. She'd been terrified, broke, one choice away from complete disaster. But she'd raised her hand anyway, and that single act of desperate courage had led here, to a foundation helping thousands, to a museum teaching truth, to a life that mattered beyond mere survival. The crowd had laughed when she'd bought the condemned firehouse. They'd mocked her for throwing away her last $600 on a disaster everyone else had dismissed. They'd called her foolish, desperate, a bad mother making bad choices. They'd been wrong, because sometimes the biggest treasures aren't hidden in vaults and safes. Sometimes they're hidden in the courage to risk everything on hope, in the strength to choose integrity over immediate relief, in the wisdom to make hard choices that honor your values instead of easy choices that feed your fear. Jessica Torres had been poor her whole life. She'd struggled and scraped and survived on scraps. And when faced with more money than she could imagine, she'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over expedience, teaching her son right from wrong over teaching him that rules were for other people. That choice had cost her nothing and given her everything. As she turned off the museum lights and headed downstairs, Jessica passed the old brass bell from Engine Company 7, now restored and polished, hanging in the stairwell. She rang it once, the clear tone echoing through the building, for Captain Henry Morrison, who'd made terrible choices but loved his family, for James Morrison, who'd found redemption in his final days, for all the firefighters who'd served here, who'd risked their lives to protect others, who'd believed in something bigger than themselves, and for herself, for Miguel, for every single parent who'd ever had to be brave when the whole world said they were foolish, for everyone who'd ever taken a chance when everyone else saw only disaster, for anyone who'd ever chosen hope over despair, even when hope seemed impossible. The bell's echo faded into silence, but its message remained. Sometimes, the best things in life come from the choices everyone else is too afraid to make. And sometimes, just sometimes, desperate courage changes everything. Jessica Torres walked out into the Philadelphia night, her son's hand in hers, the weight of impossible choices finally lifted from her shoulders. She'd found her treasure, and it had nothing to do with the bonds. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. 5 years after that December day at the auction, Jessica stood in a conference room at City Hall, facing the same people who'd laughed at her desperate gamble. The mayor sat at the head of the table, flanked by city council members whose expressions ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile. This wasn't a celebration. This was a reckoning. Miss Torres, Mayor Davidson began, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation. Your foundation has submitted a proposal to purchase and renovate 12 additional condemned city properties. The council has concerns. Jessica kept her expression neutral, though she knew exactly what this was about. In 5 years, the engine company's Seven Foundation had become more than a charity. It had become a mirror, reflecting back to Philadelphia's leadership every failure they'd rather keep hidden, every closed fire station, every abandoned school, every neglected community building. Jessica's team had documented them all. Councilman Harper, who'd been at the auction that day though he'd never acknowledged it, leaned forward. Your foundation's work has been admirable, but there's a perception that you're overreaching. 12 properties is aggressive. Some might say you're building an empire. I'm building housing, Jessica replied evenly. Emergency shelter for families facing homelessness. Exactly what this city needs but refuses to provide. The city provides adequate social services, Davidson said. The city provides waiting lists. 3 months for emergency housing vouchers. 6 months for Section 8. I know, because I was on those waiting lists. I lived in my car with my 7-year-old son while waiting for help that never came. Jessica opened her folder, sliding documents across the table. These 12 properties have been condemned for an average of 8 years. They're liabilities. I'm offering to take them off your hands, renovate them to code, and use them to help families who are exactly where I was 5 years ago. At taxpayer expense, Harper interjected. Your foundation operates on funds that came from recovered city assets. Technically, that money belongs to Philadelphia. There it was. The real issue. Not that Jessica was helping people, but that she was doing it with money some still believed should have stayed hidden. Money they'd never have recovered without her. The federal government determined that I was entitled to whistleblower compensation, Jessica said, her voice a hardening. The money I received wasn't stolen. It was earned by doing what no one else in this city had the courage to do for 50 years. Are you calling this council cowardly? Davidson's face flushed. I'm calling it what it is. Captain Morrison stole $245 million in 1967. His son hid it for 36 more years. And in all that time, not one city official questioned where the money went. Not one investigation. Just convenient amnesia while fire stations closed and pensions dried up. Jessica stood, gathering her papers. I'm not asking for permission anymore. Those 12 properties are going to auction next month. I'll be there with cash, just like last time. She walked out before they could respond, her heels echoing in the marble corridor. Her phone buzzed immediately. Robert Chen. How'd it go? About as well as expected. They hate that I'm doing their job better than they ever did. Good. Means you're making a difference. Outside City Hall, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread about the meeting, and the faces Jessica saw were familiar. These were families the foundation had helped. Parents who'd been one paycheck from disaster. Kids who'd had a safe place to sleep because of emergency shelter apartments. Maria Gonzalez pushed through the crowd, her teenage daughter Sophia beside her. Jessica remembered them from year 1. Eviction notice. Mother working 3 jobs. Daughter about to drop out of school to help with bills. The foundation had given them emergency housing and job training. Now Maria managed one of the shelter facilities, and Sophia was at Temple University on scholarship. We heard they were giving you trouble, Maria said. We came to show support. Jessica's throat tightened. You didn't have to do that. Yes, we did. You showed up when no one else would. Now we show up for you. The crowd murmured agreement. Jessica saw Mr. Patterson, the elderly firefighter who'd been at the auction. He was crying, unashamed. My pension came, through because of you. 42 years late, but it came. My granddaughter starts college next month. This was why the city council's hostility didn't matter. This was the real measure of success. That evening, Jessica sat in her modest townhouse, reviewing foundation finances with Miguel doing homework across from her. He was 12 now, tall and serious, already showing signs of the man he'd become. He knew their story, knew about the bonds and the choice his mother had made. It had shaped him in ways Jessica was only beginning to understand. "Mom," he said, not looking up from his math textbook, "Tyler's dad said you're trying to buy up the whole city, that you're no different from the landlords who kick people out." Jessica's pen stopped moving. "What do you think?" Miguel finally looked up. "I think Tyler's dad owns 4 rental properties and charges too much for apartments with broken heat. And I think you're making him nervous because you're showing there's a better way." He smiled slightly. "But I wanted to hear you say it." Pride swelled in Jessica's chest. "The foundation buys properties that are already abandoned. We renovate them and provide housing at cost, not for profit. Nobody gets displaced. We're creating homes, not taking them." That's what I told Tyler. He said his dad called you an idealist, like it was an insult. It's only an insult to people who've given up on ideals. Jessica closed her laptop. The world tells people like us to be grateful for scraps, to accept less because we deserve less. But we deserve homes that are safe, jobs that pay fairly, communities that function. Wanting those things isn't idealism. It's basic human dignity. Miguel nodded slowly. "Is that why you gave the money back? The bonds? Because you didn't want to be the kind of person who takes what isn't theirs?" "Partly. But also because keeping it would have meant teaching you that rules only apply when it's convenient. That integrity is negotiable." She reached across, squeezed his hand. "Everything I do, mijo, I do thinking about what kind of world I'm creating for you. You're creating a good one, Mom." The Foundation's 5-year anniversary gala was held at the renovated Firehouse, now gleaming with restoration, but still bearing the honest scars of its history. 300 people filled the apparatus bay, including families who'd been helped, donors, volunteers, and even a few city officials who'd eventually come around. Robert Chen gave a speech detailing the Foundation's impact. 4,200 families assisted, $67 million in direct aid distributed, 12 properties purchased and renovated into 140 housing units, job training programs that had placed 890 people in stable employment. But it was Miguel who brought the room to silence. At 12, he was young to be speaking at such an event, but Jessica had insisted. This was his story too. He walked to the microphone, index cards shaking slightly in his hands, and began. 5 years ago, my mom spent our last $600 on a building everyone said was worthless. I was 7. I didn't understand why people were laughing at us. I didn't understand why owning a building meant we had to sleep in our car." He paused, swallowing hard. "I asked her if we were poor. She said we were brave." The room was utterly still. When she found the bonds, I didn't know what they were. She explained it to me later, after the FBI came. She said it was money that belonged to other people, and we had to give it back. I asked if that meant we'd stay poor. She said no. She said we'd be rich in the ways that mattered. Miguel looked directly at his mother. She was right. We're rich in integrity, in purpose, in knowing we did the right thing, even when it was hard. He folded his cards. My mom could have taken that money and disappeared. We could be living in a mansion somewhere. Instead, we live in a townhouse with a leaky bathroom faucet she still hasn't fixed. Light laughter rippled through the crowd. But I'm prouder of her than I would be of any mansion, because she taught me that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with it. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Jessica stood with tears streaming down her face. watching her son become the kind of person she'd always hoped he'd be. After the gala, as volunteers cleaned up and guests filtered out, Jessica found herself alone in the third-floor museum. The empty safe sat in its place of honor, a reminder of secrets kept too long and truths finally told. Quite a night. Jessica turned to find an elderly woman she didn't recognize, leaning on a walker. "Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor Morrison, Henry Morrison's sister, James's aunt." Jessica's breath caught. "I didn't know James had family. He didn't speak to me for 30 years. My brother's crimes shamed us all. When James found those bonds and hid them, I told him he was making the same mistake Henry had. We fought. He told me to leave and never come back. So I did." Eleanor moved slowly to the safe, looking down at it. "I've spent 3 decades wondering if I should have tried harder, done more." "James made his choices," Jessica said gently. "He did. But I could have helped him make better ones." Eleanor turned to Jessica. "I came tonight because I needed to see what came from all that tragedy. My brother stole $245 million. My nephew wasted his life guarding it. And somehow, you turned all that wrong into this." She gestured at the building around them. "My family destroyed lives for 50 years. You've spent 5 years rebuilding them. I just did what anyone would do." "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "You did what almost no one would do. You saw $1 billion and chose integrity instead. My brother saw opportunity and chose theft. That's the difference between people who build and people who destroy." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. And before you refuse it, understand that it's all I have left to give. After James died, I received his mother's restored pension. The money you helped recover, $340,000, that should have supported my sister-in-law's old age. It came 40 years too late to help her, but it can help now." Jessica opened the envelope. A check for $340,000, made out to the engine company's 7 Foundation. "Eleanor, I can't accept." "You must. It's blood money in a way, isn't it? Stolen from people who needed it, paid to a family of thieves and cowards. But you can make it clean. Use it for the 12th property, the one the city's fighting you on. Make something good from my family's legacy of shame." Jessica hugged the old woman, feeling decades of pain and regret in her thin frame. "Thank you. This means everything. Thank you for giving my family's story a redemptive ending. God knows we didn't earn one." The 12th property was a former elementary school, PS 47, closed in 2009 when the district consolidated. It sat in Kensington, one of Philadelphia's most struggling neighborhoods, a massive brick building with good bones but decades of neglect. The city had been using it for storage, filling classrooms with forgotten furniture and outdated equipment. Jessica's vision was ambitious. Convert it into a multi-generational community center. Childcare on the first floor for working parents. After-school programs in the old gymnasium. Emergency housing units on the second floor. Job training facilities in the former library. And on the third floor, a commissary kitchen where people learning culinary skills could prepare meals for the shelter residents and neighborhood meal programs. The budget was $12 million. Eleanor's donation got them started. But they needed more. Much more. That's when the article appeared. Vanity Fair had been following Jessica's story for months, conducting interviews, reviewing documents, photographing the foundation's work. The cover story was titled, "The Woman Who Gave Away $1 Billion," and it went viral within hours of publication. The article contrasted Jessica's choice with the behavior of billionaires who hoarded wealth while claiming philanthropy. It detailed her life before the bonds, the desperation that had driven her to that auction, and the moral clarity that had driven her to the FBI. But most powerfully, it compared the impact of her $120 million foundation to what a typical billionaire might accomplish with vastly more resources. Jessica Torres has helped 4,200 families in 5 years, with $67 million in direct aid, the article noted. That's 15,000 $952 per family. Meanwhile, billionaire philanthropists donate millions to galas and naming rights. While people sleep in cars, Torres doesn't host galas. She houses families. She doesn't buy naming rights. She gives people rights to dignity, stability, and hope. The article ended with a challenge. Torres needs $12 million to complete her 12th project. She found $245 million and gave it away. Perhaps those of us who claim to care about poverty could find $12 million to give to someone actually solving it. The donations started immediately. Small amounts from regular people who saw themselves in Jessica's story. $20 here, $50 there. But also larger amounts from philanthropists who'd been shamed by the comparison. Within a week, the foundation had raised $8 million. Within 2 weeks, $15 million. Enough to complete PS 47 and start work on 2 additional properties. The groundbreaking for PS 47 happened on a warm June morning. Jessica stood with a shovel, surrounded by neighborhood residents who'd watched the school sit empty for 15 years. Miguel was beside her, now 13, and already volunteering at the foundation on weekends. "My mom bought a condemned firehouse for $600, he told the crowd. Everyone thought she was crazy. Now she's renovating her 12th building. People still think she's crazy." He grinned. But crazy in a good way. The kind of crazy that believes broken things can be fixed. That forgotten people deserve to be remembered. That communities matter more than profit. As Jessica drove the ceremonial first shovel into the ground, she thought about that December morning 5 years ago. Standing across from the firehouse with her last $600, her whole neighborhood laughing at her desperation. She'd been terrified, broke, certain she was making a catastrophic mistake. She'd been wrong about the mistake, but right about everything else. That evening, back in her townhouse with the leaky faucet she still hadn't fixed, Jessica received an unexpected call. The area code was Washington, D.C. "Miss Torres, this is Senator Patricia Wellesley's office. The senator would like to speak with you about federal housing policy reform." Jessica's pulse quickened. Wellesley chaired the Senate Housing Committee. About what specifically? Your foundation's model. The senator believes it could be scaled nationally. She'd like to discuss legislation that would incentivize similar programs in cities across the country. Would you be available to testify? Testify before Congress. About housing policy. Jessica thought of sleeping in her Honda Civic with Miguel coughing in the back seat. Of $9 an hour and eviction notices. Of every moment she'd been invisible, voiceless, powerless. "Yes," she said. "I'm available." Miguel looked up from his homework. Who was that? Someone who wants to hear what we learned in a condemned firehouse. Are you going to tell them? Jessica smiled. Every word. Because that was the final treasure she'd found in that rusted floor vault 5 years ago. Not $245 million in bearer bonds. Not even the $120 million she'd received for doing right. The real treasure was understanding that her voice mattered, that her experience meant something, that being poor didn't make her worthless, and that having money didn't make her better. It just gave her the resources to do what she'd always wanted to do. Help people who were exactly where she'd been. Desperate, dismissed, deserving of so much more than the world offered them. The system that had tried to break her was about to hear exactly how it felt to be broken by it. And more importantly, how to fix it. Jessica Torres, once mocked for buying a condemned building, was about to teach Congress itself what real wealth looked like. And she was just getting started. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.